bring our faculty and other researchers together with our distinguished lecturer joining us for about 2-3 days, meeting with the centers and institutes and research faculty and other researchers within the college. It was a privilege and honor to have Dr. Gary King from Harvard University. We had really productive meetings with our researchers, faculty, centers and institutes, and staff. Organizing events such as like this one is not easy. It takes a village. I'd like to thank the Dean for his support for these distinguished lecture series, among many other research activities at the college. I'd like to thank to our faculty engaging in both nomination and selection process. I'd like to thank our staff in the research administration team, Shelley and Erin's team, helping us organize both the showcase as well as the distinguished lecture series. Okay. So I'd like to announce that we will be announcing nomination process soon, early next month. And I encourage our faculty and unit leaders to look around and bring nationally, internationally recognized scholars to the university for the next academic year. So please watch your email and nominate faculty members from around the world, from the US, with distinctive research and scholarships that we can benefit interacting at the campus, both this campus and the downtown campus. And I'd like to bring Professor Hainan Bai to introduce our distinguished lecturer. The reason she is facilitating and introducing the lecturer today, because she was the one nominated Dr. King, and she will facilitate questions and answers, as well as introduce to our distinguished lecturer. Dr. Bai?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleasure to welcome you all join us for the distinguished lecture. I'm honored to make this introduction of Dr. Gary King. Dr. King is the Albert J. Wellhead III University Professor at Harvard University. He's one of the only 25 faculty members to have this prestige title. Dr. King is also the director of the Institute for Quantitative Social Sciences. His groundbreaking work spans statistical theory and the real-world applications, significantly shaping the field of social science research. Dr. King's contributions are widely recognized, as reflected in his election as a fellow of 8 honorary societies and organizations, including the National Academy of Sciences, the American Statistical Association, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Dr. King has received more than 55 prestige awards and prizes for his work. He has served as president of the Society for Political Methodology and vice president of the American Political Science Association. He has contributed more than 185 articles to the top academic journals, 20 open source softwares, and 8 influential books. With such an extraordinary career dedicated to the advancing both quantitative methodology and empirical research, we were truly privileged to learn from him today. Dr. King will share his significant work and insights on the topic entitled Correcting Measurement Error Bias in Conjoint Survey Experiments. Following his talk, we'll open the floor for discussion. Now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Gary King.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I really appreciate it. Can you all hear me? Great. If you have questions, please just ask me. Okay, we're not a giant group. It'd be great to make it a conversation. You can't hear me. It's green.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. How's that? Is that better? All right. Oh, yeah, that's good. I totally want one of these at home. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a particular type of survey. Maybe you know about, does anybody know about conjoint analysis? So some yes, some no, it's okay. It's quite a real world kind of survey technique. And I'll show you what it is. It's quite straightforward. And like almost all surveys, there's error in the survey. Like sometimes people don't give the answer that we expect. Sometimes people give different answers at different times. And we have to figure out what to do about that. So I'm going to show you what to do about that. Okay, so if you're ever doing a survey, you ever want to do a survey, I'm going to give you a way to make it better. Okay, maybe it'll make your results cleaner and usually more powerful. This is with some of my awesome co-authors. By the way, we have 2 sets of slides here so that I can go twice as fast. Okay. So this is with some great co-authors, Katherine Clayton, Yusaku, Aaron, Mayya, and also Libby on survey instability. Yusaku is about to take a job at FSU. So he's nearby. I don't know if is that good or bad? Okay, well, there we go. Okay, so in this talk, this clicker is not, oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what a conjoint survey question is. And then I'm going to talk about measurement error in the conjoint. Like sometimes people give the wrong answers, not the answer they intend, or there's some random variability there. What are we going to do about that? How much error is there? A lot. In all survey questions, actually, there's a lot of error. Why is there so much? Sorry, this thing is not working particularly well. Maybe I have to point it at you. No, the laser's working, the clicker isn't. Anyway, sometimes it is. So why is there so much error in this particular type of survey question? Because it's a realistic question and it approximates the real world. And when you approximate the real world, there's a lot of noise in the real world. Okay. If you ignore the error, you get bias. That is, you get the wrong answer when you do the survey and do your statistical analysis. So don't do that, okay? Is it hard to fix? No. I'm going to show you. There's just a few lines of code. You can do it on a hand calculator. You can make a correction. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to correct it also. If you're planning a survey and you haven't run the survey yet, I want you to add one more question. And it's literally going to be a repeat of the original question at a different point in the survey. Okay, we're going to see whether people give the same answer. But it turns out if you've already run the survey, there's a way to, if you've run a conjoint analysis survey, there's a way to extract the information anyway. So I'll show you that too. Okay. So we ran 13 separate surveys in order to figure out all of this stuff with 137,000 people answering questions. This is a small case of a bigger issue, which is survey instability. Okay. For 75 years, we've been doing surveys like this. And for 75 years, if you ask someone a survey question and you wait long enough so that they don't remember we asked the question, right? And nothing material's changed, and we go back to you and we ask you the same question, 25% of the time, people give different answers. For a binary answer. Isn't that outrageous? Like if for 75 years, this has been an open question as to why this is the case. But yeah, we keep just making believe this isn't the case, and we just interpret surveys. Like, isn't that crazy? Right? Why are you reading about survey results without people dealing with this question? You should send them all to me, right? We have to find some way of dealing with this question. So this talk is my first attempt at getting at this bigger issue, but I'm also simultaneously working on the bigger issue. And so I'm going to come back to the bigger issue literally on my last slide, okay? Because it's a project in progress, okay? So that's the open question for 3/4 of a century, 75 years, literally when we first realized you ask the same person a question again, and 3/4 of the time they give the same answer, 1/4 of the time they give different answers. Absolutely. If you go to my website, remember my name, GaryKing.org. That's it. Or /conjoint with an E for error, it goes straight to this. Yeah, and there's a paper associated with this as well, and there will eventually be for the survey one. Okay, for this one, we've already run 45 surveys. Each one we learn from, and then we run another one, then we run another one. Okay, but for now, I'm going to talk about the conjoint one. All right, so conjoint questions are complicated because they instantiate real-world trade-offs. This is a real one that was run by Ono and Burden in 2018. Here's what it is. So think about your answer to this question. Please carefully review the 2 potential candidates running for election to that U.S. House of Representatives detailed below. Can you see my pointer? Can you? Yeah, I sort of have to, I need both pointers. But anyway, there's a candidate 0 and there's a candidate 1. So there's 2 candidates. And there's a list of attributes, right? So there's race and ethnicity. Candidate 0 is Hispanic, candidate 1 is Asian American. There's age, candidate 0 is 52, candidate 1 is 60. There's favorability rating among the public, 70% for candidate 0, 34% for candidate 1. You know, all the way down to like the last one, experience in public office, 12 years for candidate 0 and 4 years for candidate 1. Which one would you prefer? That's what we ask at the end here. If you had to choose between them, which of these, 2 candidates, would you vote for to be a member of the United States House of Representatives? Okay, got that? Okay, can you imagine somehow, sometimes giving a different answer the second time you were asked? That's the sub. This is a big, complicated question, but it's not an unrealistic survey question, right? Because it's the real world. This is the way candidates work. Candidates, just like romantic partners and houses, when you choose them, come in bundles. You like some things, you don't like other things, Okay, so I'm going to give you a simple version of the data structure. If you know any of the literature, it's actually much more complicated in the literature, but we found a much simpler way of explaining it. So I'm just going to show you the simple way. Okay. We're going to make the dependent variable candidate 0 versus candidate 1. That's all. It's perfectly obvious. Same choice as you make. And the unit of analysis is your choice, right? The binary choice. And we survey n people, so there's n rows in the data set, and we're just going to try to predict what your answer is, a 0 or 1, and try to explain it with the attributes, right? If the candidate is a Democrat, are you more likely to choose the person or less likely to choose the person, et cetera? Okay. This is simple. So now I'm going to tell you about the more complicated one. If you don't know what that is, ignore me for the next minute. Okay, just the next minute. Then you have to pay attention. So in the literature, what they say to do, this is sort of a crazy thing. So the dependent variable is 0, 1, right? So what they do is from marketing, instead of 0, 1 and just choose, in marketing, what they used to do is they would ask you to rate each candidate separately, which that's reasonable. And then they would have your rating of candidate 0 as one observation and your rating of candidate 1 as another observation, 2 separate observations. That's reasonable because each one has a rating. You could like them both. You could not like them both. You might like one more than the other, et cetera. But if you're choosing 0 versus 1, that's the same information. Choosing candidate 0 means not choosing candidate 1. Choosing candidate 1 means not choosing candidate 0. But the people that did this analysis, that wrote, I mean, all the articles in the literature, and there's quite a lot of them now, particularly across the social sciences, they stack up the data. So you have 2 n observations, where the first one is a 0 if you chose candidate 0 and a 1 if you chose candidate 1, and the other is exactly the reverse. So it's duplicative information, right? So if you put in duplicative information, first of all, it's less intuitive, and second of all, you then have to correct the dependency in the data that you just put in there, right? So you're making it much harder for yourself. So don't do that. Also, some questions you can't ask, but if you want to do it this way, it's okay. Same corrections that I'm going to show you will apply for that as well. Okay. Okay, so you can ignore that. Now, if you weren't paying attention, you have to pay attention again. Okay. The covariates, the predictors, are the attributes. Okay, the characteristics of the candidates. But we have to code the decision, and the decision for every that is presented to each respondent is a choice of two candidates. So if it's age, for example, the covariate has to be coded as the two ages, right? So it could be 78 and 60, or 60 and 60, or 52 and 53. That's one category. Okay, so it's a little weird, but that's what it is if you're coding a race. Okay, you know, a campaign. Or for incumbency, it's an incumbent versus a non-incumbent, or an open seat where they're both challengers. If you have data like this, you can take the mean and the standard deviation just as usual. You learned it in intro stat class. Okay, so I want to give you with some precision the quantities of interest, which is just a mean and a causal inference. It'll be really simple. There's a little bit of math, but it's okay. So first of all, there's a whole bunch of attributes. For at any one moment, we would be interested in one of them, and the others are sort of like control variables. Okay, so we'll call it the attribute of interest and others. Okay, the cool thing about conjoint analysis is that the attributes across people are going to be randomized. So each person is going to see a different collection of attributes. That makes it possible for us to use any one of the attributes as the causal effect. That's really cool. So that means if you have 8 attributes, you can estimate 8 separate things without causing any problems. That's not usually the case with the statistical analysis. Usually it's only one thing. Okay. Okay, so I need some notation that A is the set of attributes. When it's red, the AL, that's the one attribute of interest, and the A of minus L is all the other attributes, the green. Okay. So now I want to say that everybody has a true preference for candidate 0 versus candidate 1, depending upon what the attributes are. We don't see that, but that's the true preference. Okay. You know, hopefully they give the answer, their choice would be the same as the preference, but we'll get to that. So that's their preference, and the preference is a function of the attributes. Okay, so far? Okay. So here's the first quantity of interest. There's only going to be 2. First one is the marginal mean in a survey, which is just the average of the preferences. That's the thing we would like to know, right? The most fundamental thing in statistics is you separate the quantity of interest from the measure, and then you see whether your measure is a good measure of the quantity of interest. So first we have to define the thing we'd like to estimate. So in a traditional survey, a non-conjoint survey, we would just take the average. So this is the preference, the average preference, given that quantity of interest, is equal to just the mean over I, that's people, of the preferences. So it's pretty straightforward. Just take the average. Okay. Whoops. So for example, the mean preferring candidate 0 to 1, of course, if it's a female versus male candidate. The implicit here is that the other attributes are set to the observed values, because that's what you're averaging over. So now I want to show you the marginal mean in a conjoint survey, which is a little different than a regular survey, just a little bit. So here, instead of taking just the average of all the observations, here we're going to take the average over the observations given the value of the other attributes, which we're then going to average over. So the only weird thing here is that we're averaging as before over all the people, but we're also averaging over all the values of the other attributes. Okay, and we're weighting them all the same. So it's a little different, so it's a little wacky, but it makes everything much more convenient. So we'll just sort of go with it. Okay. The attribute selection defines the quantity of interest. So if we're interested in the effect of Democrat versus Republican, or old person versus young person, or male versus female, then that's our attribute of interest. Okay. The criticism of this approach is that maybe you shouldn't weight all of the other possible values of the other attributes equally. Maybe some races with some collections of candidates would be really weird. You know, imagine 2 78-year-old Democrats running against each other. Like, why would that be, right? Okay, but okay. Other conjoint quantities of interest are simple functions of this mean, like differences. Let me, if we can speed this up. Yeah, okay, that's good. So, and then this is my last quantity of interest, which is we have the mean up here. Now we're going to take the causal effect. What's the causal effect? We have a race where everything is held constant, but we change we then change just the attribute of interest. So we just change, we have two candidates. Let's say let's say both are Democrats and they're running against each other in a nonpartisan election. And then we change one of them to Republican and we hold everything else constant and we see what happens when we do that. So that'd be an interesting question, the kind of question we might want to know, right? Well, what's the effect of race holding constant all the other characteristics? That's the causal effect. Okay, so far? So that's our goal. Our goal is to either estimate a mean or the causal effect. All right. So now I want to talk about measurement error. And so let me explain that. So I said that everybody had a true preference, but we don't see those. What we see are the choices. The choices are 0 and 1, and that's the answer you give on the survey. All right, this one, I choose this to go faster. Okay, so the choices are 0 and 1, those are observed. The preferences are 0 and 1, and those are unobserved. And then there's this relationship. So for some people, if they have a preference, row I, for a particular set of attributes, they give the same choice, CI, for the same set of attributes. Okay, so far? But some people give the opposite preference, which is 1 minus row. Okay, if it's 1, they give a 0. If it's a 0, they give a 1. When do they do that? Well, that's what this tau is. That's a swapping error. That's swapping error. So with probability, that's WP, with probability tau, they give the wrong answer. They give the wrong preference when asked the choice. Why would they do that, you might ask? They're humans. You know how they're the problem always, right? They do. Sometimes, for some reasons that we should study, that I am studying, people give an answer that are not equal to their true preference. Okay, so then they give that with probability tau. Okay, so that's swapping error. They swap the 0 for the 1 or the 1 for the 0. Okay, if tau is a 1, then, well, if tau is a 0, then they're always going to give the true preference. And the higher it is, the more errors they're going to be. Okay. So we now need to know, in order to get from in order to get from the observed choice to the true preference, it's very helpful to know what the probability of swapping is, what the swapping error rate is. If we knew swapping error didn't exist, if tau was 0, then there wouldn't be any problem. But if it's higher, we're going to have to do something. So we have to estimate tau. How are we going to estimate tau? If we haven't run the survey, we're going to add one more question. If we already have data, there's a way to extrapolate. Okay. So the way we're going to do it is we're going to estimate intra-respondent reliability. Reliability means you ask somebody the same question again, and you get the same or a different answer. And here's the deal. We're going to ask question 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, and then question 1 again. Okay, and then we take the difference between question 1 and question 1, right? The one asked at the beginning and the one asked at the end. And we calculate the percent agreement on the two questions. Right? And the percent agreement is the IRR, or the intra-respondent reliability. We'd like that to be 100%, but it's not going to be. It turns out that in this setup with conjoints, in conjoints, typically each person is given a series of questions, a series of tasks, they call it. And so this stretch of questions, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, Q5, Q1, that's not surprising. That would happen all the time. But because these are complicated, sophisticated, real-world kinds of questions, nobody remembers the duplicate. Okay, I'm going to prove that to you in a minute. Okay, whoops. So no one remembers the duplicate question, and clearly, like it's only moments later, so nothing material has changed. They haven't. I hereby assert they have not changed their true preference, I think, and you know, in the 60 seconds it takes to get to the second question. Okay. It turns out mathematically that if you know the IRR, you can calculate the tau. Okay, I'm not going to show you how we did this, but it's not very complicated. If you know the IRR, you subtract it from 1, multiply by 2, subtract it from 1, take the square root, divide by 2. You do something, and then you get tau. Okay, so IRR will enable you to estimate tau. Okay, all right. So remember I told you you wouldn't remember if you were asked. Yes, sorry.
Quick question. So in the previous slide, the tau is colored in green. So is that related to the other attributes?
Yeah, I made it green just so that I could annotate it basically.
Okay, got it.
Right, right. Okay, so I'm going to give you all a test. Okay, so what changed from the last time you saw this? Does anybody remember? No, of course you don't remember because you're human. Do you actually? Did you have a guess? What's that? I think the actual answer is nothing changed. You know, like it's just not possible for us to put all this in our memory unless we really work hard at it, right? You know, so we're using this setup to be able to estimate the IRR with, you know, clearly you're not remembering it and changing the answer just to spite the referee, the researchers. And you're not keeping it constant just because even if it's the wrong answer, just to make sure that you're consistent, because we're all obsessed with being consistent. Right? Okay, so these are the quantities of interest that I showed you before: the mean and the causal effect. There's the standard estimators of those things, which is you just take the mean or you take the difference in the means. That's all. Okay, but it turns out there's measurement error. So if you use the standard estimators, that's not good. If there's measurement error, if there's no measurement error, both are unbiased. Okay, so if unbiased means on average you're going to get exactly the right answer. Sometimes it'll be too high, sometimes it'll be too low, but on average you're going to get the right answer. If there's no measurement error, you're fine. If there is measurement error, so tau is greater than 0, swapping error is greater than 0. Some people swap the truth for the wrong answer. Both are biased. Almost all prior research articles make this mistake. Okay, they ignore this problem. Okay. Okay. Now you might say this is they're making an error in the dependent variable. And I don't know if you've taken an intro statistics class. You know, usually if there's a random error in the dependent variable in a linear regression, that causes no bias. Okay, but that's because it's a continuous variable, and on average it stays where it is. But if it's a 0, 1 variable, and the true answer is a 1, and you give a 0, it doesn't average out. That's the problem. So I'm going to change the obvious estimator of the mean as the quantity of interest with the mean in the sample to the mean in the sample minus a true estimate of tau if we have it divided by this thing. Okay, exactly how I got this was a little bit of math, but it's so simple. I mean, I'm not going to show you. Maybe it's not that simple to get there, but once we got there, it's really simple. If you know tau, you can make this correction to the mean and correct for the measurement error bias. And then the cool thing is, with tau known, this becomes unbiased. If you can estimate tau, which I just showed you how to estimate it, you get an approximately unbiased estimator. Okay, consistent means as n gets larger and larger, you get closer to the right answer. So all you have to do is just take that mean and just make a little correction. It's really easy. You don't need special software. You can do it. You can do it on your cell phone. You just make a little calculation. Okay, so that's what I want to convince you is the right thing to do. And then I'll show you how cool it is. Then there's some standard errors when you calculate the uncertainty. It's not the same uncertainty as you would here because now we have tau in here. You have to do it a little differently, and we came up with a really simple, easy way of doing it. Okay. So in order for this to work, in order for this to make sense, I need to show you, I need to prove to you two things about tau, and that's what I'm going to do. First of all, I have to show you that the IRR, the reliability, is small enough for this to matter. Okay, because if it's not, if it's really, really high, then I shouldn't be wasting your time. Okay. Second point is that tau might be different the swapping error might be different with one set of attributes than with another set of attributes. Maybe when the candidates are Democrats from the South, we give very variable answers, but when they're Democrats from the North, we always give the same answer. You know, I don't know, but it's possible, right? There's no, to assume it's constant is an assumption. And until now, I've assumed it's the same for all the attributes because there's just one value of tau here, right? There's only one value of tau. If there's a different value of tau for every set of attributes, then we have to estimate a whole lot of stuff, and this whole thing becomes incredibly complicated. So I'm going to try to prove to you that tau is the same regardless of what the attributes are. Okay, so I have to show you that, otherwise you can't trust me. Okay, so first thing we did is we replicated from scratch, including the data collection, 8 published articles. Okay, we replicated the data analysis and the data collection. And first thing is, every study estimates really. Every study replicates really well. The AMC, that's just the terminology for the causal effect in conjoint analysis. And on the horizontal axis is the original article AMC. And on the vertical axis is the replicated for our replication of the article. And as you can see, they correlate very highly. Everything replicates. Each one of these colors corresponds to the points. You know, some are a little farther from the line than others, but you would expect some random variability because we're doing it again in a different sample years later. You know, it's amazing that we're getting basically the same answer. Okay. The cool thing about survey research these days is, although we can't get representativeness, right? But the scientific foundation of the representativeness of surveys has completely crumbled. But at the same time, we can run surveys at very, very low cost and very, very fast. When I was in graduate school, we had to plan to do a survey for a year, and then maybe somebody would implement it if you could come up with enough money. But now for $100 or a couple $100, you can go on Lucid or Mechanical Turk or something. You can run a survey right away. So it still is making the assumption about representativeness, but there's some advantages. So anyway, this is pretty impressive. Like the literature it's not a bunch of nonsense. It completely replicates in a completely different sample on a different platform. Anyway, so that's how we did it. Okay. All right. But for every one of these, we asked the first question again. We did Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, Q5, and Q1 again. Okay, they didn't remember they asked, and then we calculated the percent agreement between the two identical questions. This is the percent agreement between the two identical questions. Okay, that is, we did this Q1, right, this whole thing, and we computed IRR. The average of these vertically is about 75%. So in other words, you ask someone a question, a conjoint question, you wait long enough so that they don't remember, you ask them the same question, and they only give the same answer 75% of the time, or 25% of the time. 1 out of 4 times they give a different answer. Wow, that's a lot. Okay. So IRR is 0.75. That means you give different answers 75% of the time. That turns out into a swapping error using that little formula I showed you. A swapping error of 15%. So what does that mean? That means in your data set, 15% of the zeros should be ones, or 15% of the ones should be zeros, or some combination. You don't know which. Okay, 15%. Now think of, just as a side point, think of a scatter plot, right? So imagine there's a scatter plot, right? There's a bunch of dots. And imagine if you could move some of the dots, could you change the relationship? Like if we went back, sorry, I can't do this fast. So I went here just as a scatter plot, just as an example of a scatter plot. If you could take 15% of those dots, could you make some of those lines flat or negative? Probably, right? You just make them real big outliers, right? So that's a big deal, okay? And we're going to do, that's what we're going to do, all right? So the first thing, remember I told you I had to show you 2 things. First of all, it's a big problem, and I think that's what I showed you. So now I have to show you the second thing, which is that IRR does not vary by attribute levels. Okay, if it does, then we have a Herculean estimation task. And instead of doing surveys, we should go collect data in India about something else. Okay, right, using some other method. Okay. Okay, so I have two ways of figuring out whether this varies by attribute, and whether IRR varies by attribute. And one is the top-down approach and the other is the bottom-up approach. So top-down approaches, we thought of all the theories, the theoretical reasons why people might give different answers, and we tried to test them, all failed. So let me give you them, they're simple. First one is when there's more inconsistencies among the attribute values, people give different, are more likely to give different answers. What does inconsistency mean? So if you have, let's say, a very conservative Democrat and a very liberal Republican, people have to look at it and think of what do I really want? You know what I mean? So that's not true. I mean, I'm not showing you the results here. I'm just showing you the answer. That seemed like a plausible hypothesis. It's definitely not true. Second is, what about really complex question wording, right? If each of the attributes had a lot of detail and long words and long sentences and things like that, maybe people in that case are more likely to give inconsistent answers. Not true. Third possibility is, what if the divergence between the two profiles of the two candidates are farther apart? So for example, one of them has age of 50, candidate 0 has age of 50 and candidate 1 has age of 53, versus a second case where somebody has age of 25 and somebody has age of 70, right? So that's, clearly if you're just voting on who's older, then it's clear, it's the same thing, but maybe we can see more clearly if the two are farther apart. It's a good theory, just false, okay? So all these fail, you can look at the paper or just trust me, or both even. Okay, so, but let me show you a bottom-up approach where we don't have to have any theory, we just test the hypothesis. We took an article, this guy Momello, who's at Princeton, published it in 2016, and we're going to replicate his article. He studies the media. He had relatively few profiles, he had relatively few attributes, and so altogether, the different possible combinations of the attributes produced 48 possible types of candidates, okay? 48 profile pairs or candidate pairs. Okay. We then collected a big data set. We collected 50 observations for each of the 48 candidate pairs. And excuse me, and for each of the candidate pairs with 50 observations, that was enough for us to estimate IRR. So we estimated IRR for each of the 48 possible attribute types. And then we're going to see whether they're the same or close enough. Okay. We then did it again, okay, just to see, just to make sure. We ran the entire experiment again. Okay. So here's our conclusions. Surveys alone have high swapping error, but when you go to Conjoint, which has real-world experiments, IRR goes down. There's more swapping error. But actually, in fact, IRR is not a function of the attributes, which is great because that makes it much easier to estimate. Okay, I'm going to show you this. I'm going to show you the bottom-up evidence that I didn't show you for the top-up evidence, top-down evidence. Okay, so let's start with the left panel. Let me explain what this is. Remember I told you we took two samples of the same thing with 48 candidate pairs, and on the horizontal axis of the left panel is sample 1, and the vertical axis is sample 2. And we estimate the IRR for each of the different combinations of the attributes. Okay, so on the horizontal axis here is one estimate, and the second is a second estimate because we ran the entire thing a second time. As you can see, there's almost no. So the mean here is about 0.75. And the mean here is about 0.75, so that confirms what we knew before. IRR is about the same in both. And then the most important thing is that there's a little correlation here, right? So if you know the attribute, it does not help you predict what the IRR is, which is exactly what we want. See that? IRR does not predict the attribute. There's no correlation on the left. In fact, we would expect we could do a significance test to see whether one of the attributes, one of the 48, is significantly different from the mean of all the others. And on average, sometimes we would see that just at random. And how many would we see? We would expect to see 2.4. That's the theoretical calculation. We actually see 3 in sample 1 and 5 in sample 2. As a statistics type, I will tell you that the number 2.4 and the number 3, those are exactly the same numbers. Okay, joke. Okay, substantively, they're basically the same, right? 5 is slightly higher, but I wouldn't worry about it. Okay. So IRR does not vary as a function of attributes. That's what we learned from the left panel. So now let me talk about the right panel, which I don't need for, I've now concluded. I now have the 2 facts I need, which is that IRR is low, swapping error is high, and then also IRR does not vary by attribute. But there's one other fact that I think would be useful to know. It doesn't stop our method, but it's useful, which is, does IRR vary by personal characteristics, right? Is my friend here much more variable when we ask her questions than I am? No, by the way. Yeah, so on the right here, we ran them both a second time, okay? And they correlate very highly. You see that high correlation? They're all labeled with numbers. That means they're significant, or almost all of them. So there's a high correlation, 0.85. So what that means is that, what that means is that IRR does not vary by attribute, which is great. We can do our thing, but it does vary by personal type, personal characteristics, and in particular, younger minority male respondents have lower IRR. Each of those separate variables. If you're worried about getting old, let me just give you one cool fact. Older people have the highest IRR. Isn't that a cool thing? You just never learn anything good about old people by doing research. But join our club. Okay, younger people are like nuts. Okay. Okay. So this is an important fact, however, because we need to estimate IRR for each subgroup separately. We don't have to estimate it for each set of attributes, which would be a real problem, because there's if you have 8 attributes, each one has a whole bunch of different possible values. There could be thousands of attribute combinations, so that would be a mess. So I'm happy to conclude that's not a problem. But subgroups are actually, it is very important to pay attention to subgroups. Okay. So let me just give you one other cool thing, which is what can you do if you can't estimate the if you can't run the survey? You already ran the survey. You downloaded a survey that existed 10 years that was run 10 years ago. You can't run it again. The population doesn't exist anymore. Is there anything you can do? Yeah, we found something cool you can do. Okay. So when in the original articles, in any conjoint survey analysis, they don't ask one conjoint question. They ask a series of tasks, right? The Q1, Q2, Q3. They don't ask the Q1 again unless you read our paper. But they ask 5 or 6 or something tasks. Now, by accident, they don't put the same one in twice. But they do put so what they're doing is they're randomizing the values of the attributes across the tasks. Okay, they're completely random. And at random, sometimes they're close, and sometimes they're farther apart. Okay, so we use that fact. So what does close mean? So sometimes an attribute pair has 3 of the attributes that are the same. All right, sorry. Let me say it again. We ask two separate tasks, 2 separate questions, and in these 2, attribute 1, 2, and 7 have the same values for both candidates. Okay, what we would like is all of them being the same, right? Because then we can estimate IRR directly. We can see whether the person's consistent, because that's Q1 and Q1. But instead, what we see in a traditional conjoint with no repeated question, we see sometimes 5 of the attribute pairs are the same in the 2 questions, sometimes 4, sometimes 3, sometimes 2, sometimes 1, sometimes none. Got that? Okay, so now I'm going to use that fact. Okay, so I'm going to calculate the percent agreement between those 2 as a function of how many attributes are the same, how many attribute pairs are the same. So on the horizontal axis here is the number of attributes with levels that differ between the 2 tasks. Okay, When there's 7 that differ, in this case of 8, then the percent agreement is basically random, which is no surprise, right? I mean, it's just asking completely different questions. When it's 6, it goes up. When it's 5, it goes up. When it's 4, it goes up. When it's 3, it goes up even more. Now, the number of attributes with levels that differ between the two tasks, what we really want is 0. 0 attributes we would like to differ between the two tasks because that's asking the same question twice. But we don't see that. We only see these. So what can we do? So we drew a line and extrapolated all the way out here, okay? And we get the red dot. So that red dot is just a prediction from all these, okay? But remember I told you we replicated all the surveys? So we replicated this Hankinson article and we added an extra question. So we know the truth for this one, the true IRR. The true IRR is the triangle. That was so the red dot was our prediction. The triangle was the truth. We did pretty well, right? Sort of wacky, right? Here's another one, Mamello and null. That's our prediction. That's the truth, right? That's our prediction. That's the truth, right? Remember, see what we're doing is we're running a line and go. It's a pretty big extrapolation, but if you don't have any data, this is the best you can do. Right? Here's another one. That one is right on, right? This one is off. So here's one where we fail, right? It's outside the confidence interval. So bummer, but it's still substantively not very far off, right? It's pretty good, right? Instead of 0.72, it's 0.77 or something like that, right? It's going to be better to use that information than not. And there's that one, and there's that one. Okay, and one more. Okay. Everybody got that? So that means that you can estimate IRR and then estimate the swapping error and then use the swapping error to make the correction. And when you have the correction, you have an unbiased estimate of the mean or the causal effect. Okay. Even if you didn't run a new survey. Okay. If you're running a new survey, just stick an extra question in there. You don't have to do these graphs. Okay. So we ran some simulations just to show, ran some Monte Carlo simulations just to show that our method works well. There's never been a Monte Carlo simulation that doesn't support the author's original hypotheses, right? So same as so we confirm that again. This is bias on the vertical axis here. 0 is 0 bias. And these are different kinds of setups with different marginal means and different causal effects. And if you don't correct the marginal mean, there's bias of different sizes. If you don't correct the causal effect, there's bias of different sizes. If you correct, there's no bias. Everything right, flat, right at 0, everything's lovely. The correction is we estimate tau. We use that little formula we use to subtract out tau divided by 1 minus 2 tau. You get the right answer if you know what the swapping error is. This is root mean square error, which is another way of doing it, and basically corrected is everything's good. Okay, Monte Carlo supports the author's hypotheses. Okay, what happens when you make the corrections? In which direction do things go? Okay, if for just one number the mean gets larger, the causal effect goes farther away from 0. So that's sort of like we like that usually, right? You know, like our effects will come through cleaner. But many times when you do analyses, you're interested in subgroup effects. So you estimate an effect in one subgroup and you want to know whether it's bigger than another subgroup. If you look at that, then we ran across many real experiments. We found that the AMC and the marginal mean increase in like 80% of the cases, and they decrease in 12%, and the signs get switched in about 5%. So you never know what will happen in your case, but lots of things can happen. Okay. And then the last technical thing is you need standard errors. You need uncertainty estimates. We give you 3 different ones. There's a convenient one with bootstrapping. There's a familiar clarify-like simulation. And then there's an analytical derivation that I'm very proud of. It's 790 times faster. Of course, the others are not particularly slow, but it took me a lot longer to do the analytical derivation, so I'm putting it in the paper, okay? There's some software if you want. Instead of Conjoint, it's Projoint. Get that? Come on, that's pretty good, isn't it? Okay. Conjoint software that we're going to release that implements all three. Okay. So last slide. What did he say? Measurement error in conjoint. How much is there? Lots. Why is there so much? Because conjoint analysis approximates real world decisions, and there's lots of things going on in the real world, and they cause us to give different answers. If you ignore it, what happens? You get biased answers. Okay, you publish results that are wrong, and then there'll be some graduate student with your name on the top of a yellow pad of paper that'll come after you. Don't do that. How hard is it to fix? A couple lines of code. You do a division and a subtraction. Okay, that's all. You're planning a survey. You add one question. You're reanalyzing existing data. You extrapolate it with those graphs that I showed you. Okay, so now I want to just tell you about this other project. This is the one half of a slide left, and then I'll stop. So survey instability. This is the project I'm working on now, which builds on the Conjoint project. Survey instability is this open question for 75 years. Why do people 1 out of 4 times give a different answer? Approximately 1 out of 4 times. That's just, to me, just shocking, both that it's true and that we haven't done something about it. Okay. So there's a debate in the literature as to what explains survey instability. Okay. One explanation is that people have random preferences. Philip Converse said, people have random preferences. They're not constrained, they're not coherent. Democracy is basically impossible. Okay. I think that's basically been shown. It's just not true. Okay. If it were true, we would never see any results from surveys, but actually we see a lot of results from surveys. Okay. Approximately half of all quantitative results, quantitative articles in the social sciences use survey data. And what's really happening is they find results that are bigger than the noise in the data that we're revealing. And that, so the bias, there's bias still, but they're finding systematic results. So this is basically, and others direct experiments have shown this is just not right. So what else could it be if it's not random? People don't have random preferences. The other possibility is it's not the people's fault, it's our fault as researchers, right? Where what's happening is we just have lousy survey instruments, lousy survey questions, and we're causing people to give different answers when they shouldn't, okay? Here's the problem though. For 75 years, we have come up with better and better ways of asking survey questions. And if you go back, which we have done, to the first surveys, survey instability has not changed in 75 years. But yet the quality of the surveys has improved. So that means it can't be the quality of the surveys. Let me give you an example. So we know now that if you ask whether you're in favor of abortion or you're pro-life or pro-choice, and you put the word baby in the question, the answer like moves all the way over, right? If you take the word baby out of the question, it goes all the way over here, right? So probably you shouldn't put the word baby in the question. So it has this big biasing effect. But does it cause instability? No, probably not. Because it takes Q1 and moves you over, and it takes Q2 and moves you over. And you give the same answer for both. So it's not the survey instrument error that's causing the problem. And so it also gets a cross out. So then what the heck could it be? There isn't anything else. So I don't know the answer yet because I don't know the answer yet, but we've run 45 surveys trying to find out, and I have a hypothesis, and I think we're likely to get there. This is not the first talk in which I've given my hypothesis. The last one, I was just wrong. Okay, so when you see the paper, then you can trust me. But I think the story is there is an intrinsic human variability. Okay, turns out in many fields, when they measure something, there's instrument error and there's fundamental error in the thing we're studying. And we have sort of skipped this or combined intrinsic human variability in with other things when we study humans, right? No human is the same as any other human. In fact, any one human at 2 points in time are like you lose and replace something like 1% of your cells every day, right? So like you're like a different person than you were when you walked in here, right? There's lots of reasons for variability. So I think this is the explanation. And we've run a lot of experiments, survey experiments to show that it is. I'm not going to show you any of them, but I'll give you a feel for where it is. So there's human variability that comes in the survey question and then in the response. Okay, so I'll tell you about both of these, the question and then the response. The question basically produces different times on task. I'll come back to the probability matching. So if you spend, 1 second or 2 seconds answering that conjoint question that I showed you at the beginning, you're going to give random numbers, right? Because it takes a long time to really ingest that, okay? Well, why would you spend 2 seconds? Well, probably because you're young, right? But some people are preoccupied. They're worried about their grandmother who's sick, or their spouse who's really upset with them, or their kids have done this thing that they always do, or whatever. Preoccupation, that's one thing, which we've actually studied, and it's not fixable. Sometimes you're preoccupied, but for whatever reason you agree to be part of the survey. That's not fixable. That's interesting, right? Mind wandering. Humans mind wander approximately 50% of their waking hours. Is that amazing? Approximately 50% of the time, we are thinking about something that is outside of what we're actually participating in. 50% of the time. No one has ever measured what that number is in watching a lecture, because right? Well, I'm worried about what that number is, okay? There's also persona, like sometimes people come into the survey and they're thinking of it as they're time optimizing. If you're time optimizing, you're just clicking the buttons, right? If you're taking it as an earnest survey taker, you're going to spend more time, think about it, and you're going to answer the questions. And then there's foci, which is up comes a question and it's sort of interesting, and you actually pay attention to it. And then up comes something about interstate banking, and you don't really care what it is, or whatever, right? So we're organizing those things. Oh, sorry, I wanted to tell you one more thing. Make that go away first. So that's basically all those things lead into time on task, and very short time on task we show produces survey instability. So I think that's actually the story at the question point, but there's also probability at the answer point. Okay, let me ask you a question. Okay, suppose you have a choice, candidates or whatever, and option 1 is better for you 60% of the time, or let's say 51% of the time, and option 2 is better for you 49% of the time. Okay, and you have 10 choices, and each one choice. The choice A is better for you 51% of the time, and choice B is better for you 49% of the time. What are you going to choose? There's no right answer here, okay? There's no right answer. There's no pressure. What would you choose? Well, let's suppose the only thing you knew is there are 10 choices. Candidate A and candidate B. There's 10, let's say 10 offices, and the only thing you know is that candidate A in every case is better for you 51% of the time, and candidate B is better than you 49% of the time. That's the setup I'm imagining. So there's nothing else to look at. That's all you know. That's all you know. So what would you do? How many? So here's 2 options. How many people would choose candidate A 100% of the time? Okay, a few people. How many people would choose candidate A, a little over half the time? Okay, so here's a cool fact for you. Okay, so most people chose the second. What you're doing is you're doing what's called probability matching. Most humans probability match. Most rats probability match. Most mice probability match. Most insects probability match. Okay, most what are those things? I forget. All kinds of animals they've studied this on. Okay, most creatures probability match. But let's back up a second. Which is the most rational answer? If you're trying to optimize for yourself. Yeah, choosing 100%, right? That doesn't mean you should do it, okay? And rational is defined by the economics department, and we don't necessarily agree with them. Right? But isn't that cool, right? I've just proved to all of you that you're irrational in a certain very specific sense, right? But probability matching is something we do, humans just do. And that creates extra variability. probability matching, we have shown, is mathematically equivalent to swapping error. That first equation I showed you where you choose preference with probability tau, right, et cetera, right, it's exactly the same thing. So you get basically this error added at the survey question time and at the survey response time. And I think that's the intrinsic human variability, but watch this space, okay? We'll come back to it, okay? And that's where you, again, that's where you can find my slides, and there's these exact slides, and also a paper and some software are coming, and data you can replicate our results, and maybe a few other things I wrote. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kim. Really, it's so exciting. We know your new method is so innovative. First, to learn a lot, and I'm eager to learn that a few lines of code to estimate. I believe our audience will have wonderful questions for you.
Great.
We want to learn more. Now we'd like to have an open floor discussion.
Are there some research?
Oh, take his.
People.
Yeah.
Are there some research topics where there's more prevalence of swapping error? For example, studying in public administration, studying local officials working in local government. Do you find that there's greater swapping error in survey responses than in surveying college students, for example?
So so first of all, we know from here that different types of people, respondents, have different levels of IRR. College students, they're impossible. No, they're younger, so they would have lower IRR. But you're asking an interesting question, which is, suppose you study a different subject, do you give different IRR? And the answer is yes. Actually, when we replicated those 8 studies, some of them had higher and some of them had lower IRR, not because the studies were conducted better or worse. It's because they were studying different things, right? If I ask you about politics, national politics today, in a highly polarized environment, IRR in certain cases is probably going to be lower. But if I ask you, maybe you could answer me, how many people are in favor of the National Helium Reserve? right. You know, like no one knows what that is, right? As a side point, I've been using that joke for a while, but I gave a talk about a year ago, and the entire first 2 rows stood up and applauded. And I said, "Who are you guys?" They were from the physics department. Like they're the only users of the National Helium Reserve, I think. There's a finite amount of helium in the universe, and we shouldn't lose it all. Anyway, if we ask that question of this audience, of me also, like we wouldn't have any opinion, right? So IRR would be different. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So you need to estimate it every time. You can't just say, oh, Gary in his article estimated the average of these is 0.75, we're going to use 0.75.
Okay, so I'm not completely sure what I want to ask here, but what I've been thinking about is like how this is like used and interpreted in practice. So I'm thinking like if I don't even know what the role is called, but some sort of like policy staffer, analyst for a candidate or something, and I'm trying to make sense of survey data that has used this method to help control. Where I'm guessing it already factors in things like, so many people select candidates based on their stance on just 1 or 2 singular factors, right? Like the one issue voters or whatever they call them.
Could be, yeah.
But I'm guessing this already kind of accounts for that. I'm just trying to make sense of how that all gets conflated with this. And I don't know if you have anything to say about that or if I'm even making sense.
So conjoint questions enable you to get at that in an interesting way.
Okay.
Right. So what would the staffer for the member of Congress care about, right? Well, they would like to it's for a member of Congress. They're trying to guess who's going to run against the candidate, right?
Okay,
And you can't really run a survey right now and say, if there was an election held today, would you vote for me or this other guy who's about to announce who you don't really know and hasn't hit the media and hasn't been defined well. But you could ask a conjoint question and say, suppose we had two candidates. Candidate one was, well, me, the member of Congress's attributes. Candidate two is this other person who we're worried about, right?
yeah.
So you could do that. You could set that up ahead of time. You could do that with a whole bunch of different candidates. Maybe you would learn that really it's just two attributes that I have that matter. And there's a particular configuration of attributes that could beat me,
That's
So-
what I was curious, like how
Yeah.
does that, okay, that's fascinating to me.
Make sure that whatever you do, you don't do it based upon, without making these corrections. Otherwise,
Right.
this candidate, whoever it is going to make the wrong decisions about whether to run.
That's what I keep thinking. This could be such a fatal flaw.
Yeah.
And okay, so one more quick question. I don't want to dominate, but can you give me another scenario in real life where this is really important, like another scenario outside of politics and two candidates, which that makes perfect sense, where this would be really important in data? Like, I don't,
Oh, sure. Actually,
I just want to hear a
this-
couple other
yeah,
examples.
this stuff came way before it was applied in politics.
Yeah, so I just love to have another
Yeah,
example.
yeah. So you're in charge of making a bird feeder. Okay, that's your
Okay.
job. You're making a bird feeder. Bird feeders nowadays, they could have a pole. They could be made of beautiful carved wood, or maybe if it's up in Boston, they could be made of steel, or metal or something. We have squirrels and fleet and stuff like that. Stuff you've never seen here.
Yeah.
And some of them have cell phones that you can, or little video cameras and all kinds of things. So there's an infinite number of arrays of these values of these attributes you could have, and you have to make the choice, and you have to put your money in. Bird feed is a silly example. It could be a car.
Like
right?
sales and marketing
Yeah,
or,
exactly.
Okay.
Those are the main use of conjoint analysis.
okay,
That's right.
thank you.
Yeah, basically, human decision-making almost always has a set of bundles, right? Have you ever seen a PhD candidate, not a PhD candidate, but an undergraduate who applies to two jobs or to a bunch of jobs, or maybe applies to graduate school and then comes to you with a spreadsheet, right? And the spreadsheet has all the offers they've received, and the columns are the columns are the offers they've received, and the attributes are the rows, and they're trying to work it out. In my personal experience, they know the answer before they make the spreadsheet, and when they add up the numbers and it doesn't come out right, they change the weights. But anyway.
So in your survey instability explanations, when you were talking about persona, I'm assuming that you may have explored this, but have you played around with the format of the surveys, for example, whether it's paper or computer, or whether the length of the survey and things like that? I'm assuming that over time, us as human beings have had lousier attention spans. We have been making more irrational decisions or poor decisions and things like that. So I'm wondering if that also plays as well.
All those things can have an effect. And another one, which you didn't mention, but it fits on your list, is did I answer the survey on a computer or on a cell phone, right? And nowadays the web has what's called responsive design, which means when you load up your cell phone, it's not teeny tiny. But it's not teeny tiny. It's even worse than teeny tiny. What happens is it reorganizes itself so you can read the whole thing. But then from the researcher's point of view, you're sort of asking a different question, or you're asking the same question in a different way, right? You don't want attribute one to show to the person, or you don't want the attributes for candidate one and then the attributes for candidate two, right? That wouldn't be any good at all, right? So you have to really, we had to really control a lot of those things. So, yeah. It's like when somebody says survey, sorry, you got to really know exactly what they're doing. Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. King. This is all fascinating, and my interest is highly piqued now.
Okay.
But moving into the future, let's say that you crack the code. You're working on explaining. Explanation is in progress. But let's say that you do your studies and you crack the code and you figure out what percentage or proportion has an impact, and what's the ramifications or possibilities in the future?
What's the ramifications and possibilities in the future for
If you
what?
figure out like,
Oh, you mean if I,
Yes.
you mean in addition to me getting to publish another paper?
yes,
I think I think the consequences that we're likely to, or the practical application of this, in some cases, we're going to correct for measurement error like we're doing in this paper. In other cases, like when people are preoccupied, we've tried to, take someone that was preoccupied, like, she's really preoccupied. So please pay attention to me. She doesn't. Like, it just is impossible. If somebody's really preoccupied, like, no matter what we do, we can't get them to move. We can't make them stable. And, fair enough, right? We're humans, right? So I think for some cases, like the conjoint, you do a statistical correction, right? You just correct for measurement error. For some cases, like preoccupation, I think you ask people a filter question at the beginning about whether they find themselves preoccupied with some particular issue, right? And then you take those people and treat them differently. I don't mean you be nice to them or whatever, but you set them aside and you realize any answers they're going to give to other questions are irrelevant. But now if you do that, we would have selection bias if certain types of people are preoccupied, right? So, okay, one option there is to recognize that we have a different quantity of interest. I mean, for example, if all men are preoccupied, then our sample is just women. So that's fine. We can learn about something. We just have to understand what it is we're learning about, right? So we can correct some things that way. There's other things like mind wandering, where the longer you go in a question, the longer I answer here, right? The higher the probability that you're going to mind wander. That's the way it works, right? So that means mind wandering is something that happens during the survey. And if you just take, and there are survey questions you can ask about whether people are mind wandering, which we've done. And we're doing eye tracking too, to try to really figure that out. But you can't really take the people who are mind wandering and take them out of the survey, because you would remove everyone from the survey. Everybody mind wanders to some degree. And also, if you took the ones who mind wandered the most, they may mind wander as a result of the question. So then that's like selection on the dependent variable that induces bias, right? So there are other statistical things you could do in that case. We might be able to predict the types of people that would mind wander. And older people tend to be able to control what they're thinking about a little bit more. And so, you could do that. But of course, we don't want to limit our sample just to older people who have plenty of time to answer the survey, right? If we're trying to predict an election or something, that's not very useful. So there's practical things, but we're working on it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sarah kind of teed up the question I actually want to ask, which is, do you see variance in IRR based on single attribute decision makers versus multiple attribute decision makers? And then when you probe at those individual attributes, do you then see greater instability within that attribute, even though they have a stable decision making about that single attribute at the beginning?
It's a really good question. Of course, people don't have written across their forehead that they're a single attribute decision maker. So it's hard to find them. We have, of course, we have taken our conjoint and just reduced the number of attributes, so making everybody a single attribute decision maker. If there's a single attribute, IRR does increase, not all the way, but it increases somewhat. If there's two or more, it doesn't matter how many, it drops. And in the real world, of course, there's a lot.
Because I'm thinking, like, if I vote based on education policy, and that's the only attribute I consider when I'm thinking about a candidate, education policy isn't a unitary thing. So when I then probe at the policies that are going into that education policy, am I now going to have less stability in my decision making? Am I more likely to switch between decisions once I start probing down at that education policy? And as a result, my original response wasn't actually useful to you as a researcher, basically.
So we have gone down that path and tried to find the theory, the top-down theory, if you remember the slide, that would explain instability as a result of those kinds of that kind of logic. We haven't found anything. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So it's possible, you know, but.
Thank you so much for your great questions and also fantastic discussion. We all appreciate Dr. King, you share your valuable resources here and also your wonderful, truly distinguished lecture. And I would like to send our special thanks to you again.
Thank you. Thank you for the great questions. I really appreciate it.
Now I would like to invite our Dean, Grant Hayes, to present this honorable certificate to Dr.
Oh,
King.
my. Oh, thank you very much. The official way of doing this is like this. No, you go like this.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have this one. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
This is
Oh,
our
it's
UCF
even
logo.
better. Oh, that's really nice. Wait, how do you do this?
Thank you.
Let's do the handshake again.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be in front, right?
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you. That's really nice. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
I believe our discussion will continue and Dr. King's website will have a lot of hard hit. And next, I would like to turn this over to our research director, Katherine Sorry, I got a little bit nervous. For the opening of our research showcase impact. Okay.
Thank you so much, Hyan. Welcome to our, thank you very much for attending the Distinguished Lecture Series today. We really enjoyed seeing you here. We are going to now follow it up with our Research Impact Showcase 2025. We've been doing this for many years now, and we've really been able to provide a very robust presentation by our students and our faculty. And so we just want to welcome you to that event. It will start officially at 3:30 with the students will be in this room to be judged. There is 9 presentations per center. And then in the gallery, our faculty are also going to be sharing their research. These sessions there are going to be 3 sessions at 30 minutes apiece, and that give our students time to discuss their research for any of you who would like to go and talk to them about it. And then once that, we will have a reception, and then we'll have an awards ceremony at the end about 5:40, I believe. So we welcome you to stay throughout and enjoy the fellowship with our students and our faculty. Thank you.